Thank you. Welcome, everyone. And we are in number four section of basic Christianity. Today, we're going to be talking about God's being, his wisdom, and his power. A lot of these correspond together, and they definitely do within life, but as we trust God. And sometimes people say, oh, how do I know I can trust God? And I would turn them to the attributes of God that we have been discussing all along, that he is eternal, he's spirit, he's unchangeable. In his being, he is wisdom and he is power. And so we are going to talk about how we can trust God in all of these areas. When I was younger, I had a hard time, and as most people do, understanding and trusting my parents and my mom. And my kids have had that same struggle. You're a little kid and they tell you to do something, and you don't understand quite why is that important. One of those was this little nightlight that I had, and my mom always told me, says, make sure the lid's on there, and when you put it in, and you can push that button, but don't ever take this lid off. And one day I took the lid off, and there was and this took this light off as well. And I wonder what happens if I put my finger down into this where the light socket was, and I got the shock of my life. I didn't have the wisdom at the time to know what was going to happen, but my parents did. And when we get into these situations and we look at the attributes of God, we understand that he's so much beyond us that it forces us to rely more upon him as a result. And so let's go ahead and let's turn into what we're doing today is we're going to be talking about his being and his wisdom and his power, because God ultimately is like the parent, and we are constantly like the little kid putting our finger in that socket and getting a shock of our life. And we wonder why. And so we're going to look at this. First, it was God is in his being. And that's the first thing we want to talk about. In other words, God is not a abstract merely. He is not something that is merely something we made up out of the confines of our own mind. A lot of people think that God is something that we invent. I think if we were going to invent a God, we would invent something like the Romans or something like the Romans or the Egyptians did. But to invent the God that we have really is really challenging. I don't think that's where our mind goes, is for someone who is being. And God really does exist. In Exodus, he looked at Moses, he says, I am that I am, Yahweh. He exists. He says, I take my home in heavens. And I am in the heavens. And we're going to talk about his omnipresence. And we have talked about his omnipresence, that God's everywhere. But his true presence, where he dwells, are in the heavens, that he says. And so God is being. And without him being, by the way, we wouldn't exist either. We would not have being. Being does not exist just on its own. Some people say there was nothing, and then all of a sudden that nothing became something, and then that something became a being. And how do you take nothing, which is nothing? Nothing doesn't become anything. It doesn't exist to do anything. And I have often say, how does nothing become something? And people say, well, chance is how nothing becomes something. And chance is nothing either. Chance doesn't happen. Chance doesn't do anything. It is nothing. Chance is not something. You can't take a rock and say, chance made this a human, because chance doesn't exist. It doesn't make anything. It doesn't create anything, nor does nothing become anything. No, we became something because God is being. And being, he does something. He is the initiator. He acts and things happen. And thus, we were created. And we have being. Something that we share with God, not in the fullness of God, but we have and we do with God. But not only in his being is God a being, but God is wise, and he is all wise and all knowing and all, and he has manifold wisdom. Think about the wisdom here for a second. just contemplate. When I work, I do a lot of projects. In fact, most of my job is projects, is working on something to accomplish a major task. It's very strategic, looking forward months, years, even up to 10 years is what we try to look at. And when I'm doing that, and I'm looking forward to that way, one of the things that I do when I'm looking forward to that degree is plan and strategize and try to have wisdom on how this would work out really in real life. God doesn't need to sit around and plan. He doesn't sit around and contemplate, I wonder what would happen if I do this. For God, wisdom is pretty instantaneous. That's how wise he is. When God says, let there be light, he, in his wisdom, immediate wisdom, was able to create all the atoms and all the particles that were needed to make light. When he created mankind, he was able to create all the organs and all the eye, the heart, the functions of the body immediately and instantaneously. And then he breathed into man, and man became being. That is the type of wisdom where just at a spoken word or through the breath of God that we become. And we become in the fullness of we are. We don't eventually get to becoming human, but we are fully human in the fullness of what God has talked about. That is the wisdom of God that we ultimately have in us, in him, the full wisdom that doesn't take these years or months. If God was doing the projects I was doing, they would not only be perfect, but they'd be done already because he would speak them into existence. And that, my friends, is the full wisdom. Our wisdom pales into comparison to him, which allows us to come to God and to say, God, I'm not wise. I'm not insightful. And these bad things are happening and these negative things are happening. I can't even question you because you are much wiser than me. I may not like them, and it may cause me discomfort. It may cause me death. But you are ultimately wise. And I can trust you because you are ultimately wise in making out. But the other attribute that I want to get to today is power. Before I get to the power, let me read this verse. It says, O Lord, how manifold are thy works. In wisdom hast thou made them all. The earth is full of your riches, riches. And I believe that's talking about wisdom. We could look the earth and see the wisdom of God throughout all of creation. And then God is all powerful. Just like his wisdom when he was creating, God was able to fling out the universes upon universes upon universes upon universes. God was able to create everything, and even the sun and the moon and the stars, and he's all powerful in the sense that none of those can bind him, or none of them can even harm God because of his power and murders his power. God is so powerful that the scripture says he split the Red Sea. God is so powerful he could heal people. And so when we match the wisdom of God and the power of God, we know two things: that when we need to take refuge, we need protection, we can run to God and he can protect us. And yet he's wise. And he just doesn't indiscriminately protect us, but he is wise in how he protects us. He is wise in how he covers us and makes us and develops us. And even the bad things we come to him, we shouldn't even question his wisdom. Not like Job and trying to run away from God. Well, God's all powerful. You can't run away from God. And yet, like not Job, Jonah, running away from God. And yet God's all wise. Even if Jonah doesn't like it, he should trust in the wisdom of God. Job as well. When Job looking at God, God looked at him and says, where were you when I laid the foundations of the world? I'm all wise. What you're going through is through my wisdom. It's okay. You're going to get through this. You will be with me. You are my child. Trust me. And yet at the same time, he was all powerful, who could control it and stop. what needed to be stopped. So who are we to say, God, I'm more wise than you? And who are we to reject the wisdom of God? And that should cause us to worship. May the Lord bless you, and may the Lord keep you, and may his face shine upon you and give you peace. Amen.